Hey everyone, we're back with more layers. We're back with more layers again. I'm Seth Mariano,
I'm Jordan Smith.
and today it's July 3rd, the eve of Independence Day.
Mm-hmm.
Hope you, if you haven't been doing anything yet, you have some fun this weekend celebrating the birth of our nation. And let's hope Jordan's dog doesn't get traumatized or anything.
Yeah, one of them, she doesn't do too bad. She'll usually just bark at it, but the other one does get scared. So, as long as people don't fire them off in populated areas like our little neighborhood here, then we should be okay, but who knows?
And today we're talking about what is good fictional heroes and villains.
One thing that not a lot of people know is that I actually kind of have a thing for the villain or like the anti-hero. I don't know why. It's just like the general character, their story, the types of things they can do. They just fascinate me. So, and especially when it comes to, let's say, Disney, they usually have some of my favorite songs.
Yeah, given the choice between a hero and a villain, I think I would personally take villain every time.
Oh yeah, like in real life, I would want to be a hero, but in a fictional world, villains just fascinate me. The first thing I really wrote down is that for both heroes and villains, it's generally a good idea to give them a good like backstory or origin story that audiences can identify with and or relate to. I think that's why I don't really like Superman all too much, simply because he was just born with everything. And not a lot of people can connect with that. So,
And in a way, you could probably say he was like the envy of all the world because of that.
yeah, a lot of people just viewed him as a god because he I don't know if he still really does this in the comics, but I remember at one point, I think this was before 1986, something he could do in his comics was that he could literally make up any power he wanted on the fly and then use it.
So kind of like a name it, claim it thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
I actually thought in a of one way that Superman, and this was just based on the couple of films directed by Richard Donner,
Sure.
that I thought made him a good hero, at least the way he was written in the films, was that he did make what you could argue were some mistakes. Spoiler, beware of spoilers, people. When Lois Lane died in the earthquake at the end of the first movie, you know, you could hear flashing in his memory his dead Jarrell saying human history, and then he goes off and rewinds time, undoes Lois's death.
Oh yeah, I know a lot of people were either confused or bothered by the fact that he could just do that because then anything that happens that doesn't turn out like he wants, he can just reverse time and do it again.
So that was, you could maybe argue, was one mistake that he made. And
Right.
interestingly, though, he never really seemed to suffer a consequence for that, which, if I kind of, I think it's ironic because then in the second film, well, in the Donner version that was more recently released, he's in the Fortress of Solitude with Jarrell. He's talking about how he wants to be with Lois. And Jarrell pretty much, before he even goes through with the decision, he calls him out and says, "You're going to turn your back on the world that needs you so you can chase after your selfish desire."
Yeah, that's a choice that seems more human, so some might connect to that, but still, like it seems more selfish of him than anything else.
then if you know the film, if you know the scene, needs to explain that there is a way it can be made possible. He'll have to give up all of his powers forever. He begs him, think about this. Think about what you're agreeing to do.
Right.
Essentially, not necessarily literally, but essentially, Superman just says, "I hear what you say. I, I'm going after what I want. End of story." And he goes through with it. But then, if you know what happens after that, something goes wrong, and then he sees something that's happening, and he pretty much trudges his way back to the fortress and very sincerely confesses, I made a mistake. I've stabbed the neck. Now there's no one to help them. So by this point, he's suffered a consequence. He knows how the hurt that's caused his decision. But on the plus side, he does get another chance. He does get his powers back and end up saving the day.
Sure.
So those two examples of scenes from those movies, I think, the fact that he actually made a couple mistakes and in at least one case paid for it, in a way, I guess that sort of humanized him, made him maybe a little bit relatable, and an overall good hero character, at least in the movies.
Right. Yeah, that definitely was a big help. And I guess kind of going off of that a little bit, I also wrote down that heroes and villains should have a good motivation for why they do what they're doing. And to add to that, I said you don't want to have a villain who's trying to take over the world simply because they're evil.
Or just for the sake of taking the world over.
Oh, yeah, it's like, oh, I'm evil, might as well just, take over the world because I'm evil, or I just want to show people my power. It's like, they're just so many villains that have done that. It basically has become white noise at this point.
After just a little while of that, I think it gets like cliche, really annoying cliche.
Oh, definitely. The Nostalgia Critic on YouTube, he doesn't really use this joke much anymore, but for a while when reviewing cartoons or films, if there was a villain that wanted to do that, he'd be like, his motivation is to, you guessed it, take over the world. And then it would cut to, I think it was the live action version of M. Bison from like a Street Fighter film or something. He just goes, of course.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the Nostalgia Critic, as that's the name he goes by, has a self-titled web series, The Nostalgia Critic, on a YouTube channel called Channel Awesome. Does a lot of discussions of nostalgic or well-known movies, specials, things like that.
Yep. And that was one of his running jokes for a while, is that if there was a villain that simply wanted to take over the world, he would refer back to that.
We've talked about backstory, which I would have to agree is like a deal maker in a way.
Yep.
And motivation. In a way, I think those two can sometimes, if not in all cases, go hand in hand, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. I do.
Yeah. A good example of a backstory and or motivation, the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai franchise.
Well, I haven't seen the Karate Kid films in a while, and I haven't seen Cobra Kai yet, but I have understood at least some of the story.
You being a fan of Japanese culture, like you've mentioned, you might like it because woven into it deeply is like the old-fashioned Okinawan karate philosophy.
Oh, Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into that then.
I have a couple of friends who are into the Cobra Kai show. For some reason, somehow my dad found it one day and said, "Hey, let's check this out." I'm like, "Okay." And before long, I guess I really got into it, and there's just something about how it was made, how it was written, that struck me unlike a lot of other stuff I've ever seen. Because I feel like a lot of fiction these days, or maybe it's just from like the Disney Channel or general fictional stuff that I've seen like in modern media lately, it
Hmm.
doesn't really that stuff doesn't really seem to like really give multiple dimensions to a character. But Cobra Kai seems to, for the most part, avoid that because you have a backstory, at least with characters like Johnny Lawrence, who's a villain from the movies, and with one of the students who eventually joins his dojo, Tori Nichols. In a
Hmm.
way, I think Tori, like, the character by Peyton List, sums it up pretty good when she says, "Some people have it good, but we have to fight for every inch of what's ours."
And I think that's more of the character that I can connect with are the ones that really have to earn all the gains they get from things instead of it just being handed to them.
What was really interesting for the first like few times Troy appeared on screen, and she came off to me as sort of a like the one of the blonde, typical discriminating it girl that you're seeing in like kid shows and stuff. But then we hear her say stuff like the quote that I just mentioned, and see her living situation, and you start to think, and then you see she's dating someone, and then someone else kissed him, and then you see okay, maybe there's sort of pun intended more layers to character.
That was good. That was
Yeah.
good. All right. So for me, when it comes to heroes versus villains, like inevitably, if there's a hero and a villain, chances are they're gonna come to blows at some point. They're gonna fight. Uh, and I think should that ever happen, you want them to have a good conflict or at least a good reason to be fighting. And on top of that, I listed as a bonus, if it's heroes fighting amongst each other, you again want to have something come up that divides them in a believable way. And I know I kind of lift Marvel and kind of deal blows to DC a bit. I do like them both, but a good example of this being done well is in Captain America Civil War, where it's two teams of heroes going up against each other simply because they're divided on whether or not their action should be supervised. And it's done in such a way where you kind of want to root for both sides, making the fight all the more tragic. And then an example of this not being done so well was in Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman. Because it's like, yeah, it's cool to see Batman and Superman fight because they've done it before in other mediums. But in this film, they don't really have a lot of reason to hate each other or reasons to fight. So it isn't as exciting as a lot of people thought it should be.
There are a few superhero films that I have genuinely enjoyed, like the aforementioned Superman's and Pixar's The Incredibles, which is
Okay.
another example thought of for this topic.
I was about to say The Incredibles, they did something you don't really see in most superhero films because this is like a family of them, and you don't really usually get that. And then the villain was a hero, at least he tried to be, and then when he couldn't go down the path he wanted, he went evil.
I would probably say that The Incredibles has a sort of is probably an exceptional example of a story with a strong hero and a strong villain,
Mm-hmm.
thus resulting in a satisfying, more intriguing than not conflict. You understand where both are coming from. You can find at least some things to agree with each of them on. You know,
Sure.
like Syndrome. You know, interestingly, people like on the internet have given Mr. Incredible a hard time, if that's the right sort of verbiage
Sure.
For being hard on Syndrome before he became Syndrome. But I don't know if I could blame him. The kid was pretty much stalking him, not listening to him. Like, well, maybe not intentionally or anything, but I guess what to say. Some people can only take so much of that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, he at one point when at the time Incrediboy was just randomly sitting in his car, Mr. Incredible started going through a list of all the things he did for the kid, despite the fact that he didn't really want to. He's like, I've been nice. I've read every scrap of paper you pushed at me. So he was at least trying to be patient for a while, but it was implied that this kid was really pushing it and it was starting to get on his nerves.
I could argue Syndrome made a good point or so about Mr. Incredible being stubborn or cruel or hostile. Maybe not intentionally, but still similar to Buddy Pine's innocent mistakes. I think that might have come off as evil, but never really were intended that way. In a similar way, Mr. Incredible may have come off as, I guess is the word, and maybe that wasn't the intention, but Syndrome took it that way, and in a way, maybe on the negative side of him.
Really, what Syndrome boils down to is that his reasons are understandable, but his actions in response to those reasons, not so much. It's like you can understand why he's doing what he's doing. And he even says at one point, I'll distribute all these inventions that I have so that really nobody is special.
In a way, you're talking about you can understand, but you don't agree with their decisions. In a way, you can see that in Cobra Kai too, like when another spoiler at the end of the second season, Tori starts a big fight well because of the kiss I mentioned.
Sure.
What's also another really good thing about Cobra Kai is that Johnny Lawrence's first student in the newly revived Cobra Kai dojo, Miguel. Johnny takes him in as his first student and introduces him to that whole strike hard, no mercy philosophy, and the unintentional consequence pretty much is he becomes, I guess you could say, psychotic, pretty much becomes something of a bully for a while. Thankfully, though, he does see the mistake and recover from that, thankfully.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of said something that ties in with that, where I said that a good hero might have once been a villain, but will see the error in their ways and do whatever it takes to change to a good guy permanently. And examples that I listed were like Megamind, who was a villain and then became a good guy. Darth Vader, who kind of went from good to bad to good again. And then the Winter Soldier, or Bucky Barnes from Marvel, he was a good guy and then he was brainwashed to be evil. And then once... This is also kind of a spoiler for Falcon and Winter Soldier, for those who haven't seen it. It's shown that he is over he has successfully overcome the elements that would cause him to be brainwashed. And he literally created a list of people that he wronged so that he could go out and do something to help them to kind of mend the wounds that he caused in the past.
Okay. I did think of one other superhero, Spider-Man, specifically from at least the first major Marvel movie back in 2002. Probably the big mistake everyone remembers from that movie is when the robber is running through the wrestling promoter's office, and he just stands there because he didn't get all the money he was expecting from the promoter after winning the match. So he pretty much thought, screw the guy, then lose his money. But then, although it is implied in the third movie that it wasn't that guy who killed Uncle Ben, anyway, so later, after he leaves the office or the arena, he finds Uncle Ben dead. Then he pretty much chases the guy down, assuming it's the killer, or finds out he's the robber. You can see after he's become a hero, he has made a mistake.
Right.
And then there are some things maybe you could call mistakes. I'm not totally sure that he did, like when someone would come out of shows or come out of an unknown location and confront him, he would just take off that word. Like right after he confronted the robber guy, some cop or something said, "Hey," and he just took off. Or when he sat the dead body of Norman Osborn down on the couch, here he comes in. "What did you do?" He repeats. He just takes off, doesn't say anything. So that might explain why Harry thought Spider-Man killed him.
Very true. Yeah, didn't even think about that.
All right, you got another? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got there are like 3 or so listed here. I said that an interesting villain might think what they're doing is the right thing or the best thing or even a heroic act. And the first character that came to my mind was Thanos from the Marvel films. And he kind of explains in Infinity War and Endgame that his home planet was really starting to suffer because of overpopulation. So he proposed the idea of wiping out half the population so that the other half would be able to live on and thrive. But it was rejected. So he basically went, okay, so instead I'll do this to the entire universe so that whichever half randomly survives, they can thrive because there's enough resources to go around. And sure enough, when he goes back to his home planet, it's suffered. It's pretty much gone because of the very issue he tried to prevent. So while he thinks he's doing something good to help one half, it's simply the fact that he's eliminating the other half to get to that point, which ultimately makes him a villain, even though he doesn't think so.
Okay. I was thinking about Kreese, who was the original sensei of the Cobra Kai dojo in the original Karate Kid film, and then they brought him back for the Cobra Kai series after an All Valley tournament, and he shows up like at the end of the first season, and he may not be the most, I guess, fleshed out character or fleshed out villain, but he's an example of someone who is very convinced that what he does or what he teaches is for the best of his pupils or whoever he's mentoring.
Sure.
But if you know the character, he's the guy who taught the philosophy or coined the philosophy: strike first, strike hard, no mercy, get back before they can strike at you, or get revenge on those who have wronged you sort of mentality. That was his message. That was what he preached. to be fair, at least a little bit of a backstory is presented, like during the most recently completed season, the third season. So you can get at least a little bit of an understanding of ideas where this attitude came from.
Sure.
So it's not all totally painted black and white, like for good.
And kind of one more big point that I wrote down is that kind of referring back to the whole like versus thing between a hero and a villain. A good hero and villain might have previously shared a deep connection in the past, making it all the more tragic once they inevitably come to blows and possibly even to the death. And the very first thing that came to my mind almost instantly when I wrote this down was Obi-Wan and Anakin in Star Wars. Obi-Wan even says after they have finished their fight, "You were my brother, I loved you," which makes that whole thing more tragic to watch because you knew that they had a close relationship at one point. They fought side by side, they helped each other out, and then Anakin makes some bad choices, which turns him evil, so that when they go to fight, it's like you knew this was coming, but it's still hard to watch because of what they used to share.
I think you can sense in that scene that right before Obi-Wan's eyes, Anakin is being destroyed by his prideful, bitter, or whatever self. But Obi-Wan is tearing up over him because of how hard he worked to build into him, how confident he was in him, or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And even right before their final battle, at least in the prequel trilogy, Anakin is saying, like, I have reasons for why I'm doing this. And I know now, supposedly, that what the Jedi are doing are really the ones in the wrong. And Obi-Wan is trying to talk him out of it constantly. And at one point, he's just like, there's no getting through to him. I don't want to do this, but I will if I have to. So, like, just seeing that moment where he's like, I can't get through to him. I got to do this. It's just so hard to watch because you know he doesn't want to, but at the same time, he knows that this might result in him having to kill him.
It's been said, you can't help someone who isn't willing.
Very true. And at that point, Anakin was pretty much gone until much later in the series when he was like, wait a minute, this guy is really the evil one. I'm going to help my son out. But when he first fights Obi-Wan, it just looks like all hope is lost. And that's how Obi-Wan pretty much saw it. So he's like, I can't help him, so I got to stop him.
During that final scene with the Emperor in Episode 6, I can imagine her thinking, all this time I thought this was the guy who got it, who understood, who respected me, who understood me, and was looking out for the best of me, and who had the right idea. Yeah. But
Yep.
Look what he's doing to this innocent guy, all because he's not getting what he wants.
Not to mention the fact that it was his son.
Yeah. I did have specific characters that I thought about, specifically from Toy Stories 2 and 3.
All right.
What is probably smart, one thing we probably didn't talk about yet was the fact that how sometimes, like in the cases of these movies, a villain will come off as an innocent, charming, fairly likable sort of fellow.
Sure.
And then tensions will rise, or something serious or dramatic will come along, and then you really see their dark side, their wicked side come out.
Okay.
When Woody decides like to leave Al's apartment or whatever and go home. The prospector, who's pretty much been a friendly kind of chipper fella, and then he goes to stop him by locking up the air vent. He has this exchange back and forth with Woody and with Jesse, and says, "I've spent all my life watching all the other toys get sold. Now I have a chance to be free, and I'm not letting anyone mess it up for me." So on one side, you're thinking, he's trapping someone who wants to go. He's forcing him to do something he doesn't want and that he doesn't even believe in. But at the same time, you're thinking, oh man, this guy's had an unfair life. He just wants to enjoy life like everyone else. And at the end, when he gets, I guess, foiled, like in the airport baggage area, he has that roaring mini monologue where he goes, "You're going to end up in a landfill if you go with the life you've chosen."
You'll be completely forgotten. Yep, I do remember that. And I guess, like, since you mentioned Toy Story 3, I'm assuming you're going to talk about Lotso, who had a kind of a similar idea.
Yeah. Early on, he's introduced as, sort of similar character, sort of chipper, warm, friendly fellow. Hello, who's a gracious host and whatever. And we hear about his backstory about how he was actually his owner, and so she compensated by getting Lotso. He took it the wrong way and jumped to the conclusion that he had been rejected and replaced. So you can see where he's coming from. You can see where his resentment or his ideas or whatever may have come from. You see what made him feel bad or whatever. And then when he's confronted and Woody and company are trying to escape, he gets all fiery, defensive. He's pretty much, for some reason, whether he's bitter or something, one thing he's insisting on keeping locked up, trapped, imprisoned in this daycare place.
Right.
Yeah.
And you talking about these points, I thought of another character that kind of fits into that, which was Callahan from Big Hero 6. Because he seemed like a nice, chipper guy. He was helping other people achieve their goals, invent new things. But turns out that a lot of what he was doing ended up just being a ploy to get back at somebody who supposedly had a failed experiment that ended in his daughter's demise, and he just wanted to get back at the guy.
Yeah, thinking about the sort of the come off as charming as first idea, when I thought of that, I thought back to there's that sort of a warning in scripture about, some people might come off as innocent or likable, but deep inside they're manipulative or dangerous or something. So in a way, I guess, stories with that kind of writing can be sort of, I don't know, allegorical, I guess is the word.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that.
All right, well, I think this has been a good discussion. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again, and enjoy your time off for the 4th of July, and happy birthday, United States. And feel free to watch or listen to episodes anytime on Facebook, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, or YouTube.
Yeah, and if you have any suggestions for future episodes, or if you want to add to anything we've said in this or previous episodes, please let us know. We'd love to engage in conversations with you.
Yeah, please chime in. We'd like to hear from you.
Yes, we will.
All right. Until next time, we are More Layers. We are signing off. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.